I'm selling this house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend. Dad, who betrayed Mom, further hurt her. This house was in Dad's name, but Mom had contributed a significant amount of money to build it, and she loved this house. Yet, Dad decided to claim everything for himself without considering Mom's feelings. Now, 12 years after my parents' divorce, I've come to understand things I couldn't back then and decided to take revenge on Dad. I couldn't forgive Dad for living comfortably after hurting Mom, who had struggled to raise me. Does your company condone affairs? That's what I told them during my interview at Dad's company. My name is Chloe. I'm a 21-year-old senior in college, currently job hunting. When I was in 4th grade, my parents divorced, and we moved to Mom's parents' house, which meant changing schools and my entire environment, which led to some mental instability. I wasn't very sociable, so making friends was hard. Being a child of divorce, I was often left out, and I didn't have the courage to initiate conversations. For the 2 years from the transfer until graduating elementary school, I had no close friends and felt isolated, often getting sad remembering friends from my previous school. Moreover, Mom was working all day, so our time together decreased, and I spent more time with my grandparents. My grandparents were caring, but having always been with my parents, I found it hard to open up to them. However, things settled down when I started middle school. There were many students from different elementary schools, so I finally met people who didn't prejudge me for my parents' divorce. I made friends and slowly started to become happier, leaving behind my constant sadness. Determined not to burden Mom, I focused more on my studies. I got a scholarship that covered tuition for college, leading to a busy life filled with studies and part-time work. I wanted to make Mom's life peaceful and happy, so even in my busy life, I felt fulfilled. I've become more sociable than before, but the trauma from my past still lingers. Until 4th grade, when my parents divorced, I lived a normal life with both Mom and Dad. I was a shy child, so even though I had friends, I mostly spent weekends with my family. I think I was a child who loved my parents dearly. We used to have family meals together every morning and evening, and after dinner, we'd spend time together as a family. But then Dad started coming home late from work, and there were nights he wouldn't return before I went to bed. Dad was already in a managerial position then, and Mom told me he couldn't come home because of the responsibilities and overtime. Even though I felt lonely, I understood that it was Dad's job that provided for our current lifestyle. So I hoped Dad would be able to finish work earlier. This routine continued until one night, I woke up and heard my parents arguing. This was something that had never happened before, and curiosity overcame my anxiety. I cautiously approached to see what was happening. Dad, angry and carrying his belongings, stormed out of the living room. Enough! I'd rather be with my girlfriend than you. We're getting a divorce. Mom started crying at his words, but Dad ignored her and headed for the front door. Dad! Knowing what divorce meant, I feared I'd never see Dad again, so I ran after him and clung to him, hoping the kind Dad who used to play with me would stop. Get out of my way! But Dad, who had never been rough with me before, glanced at me coldly and shook me off without hesitation. Thrown harshly, I rolled down the hallway, bruising myself. I burst into tears from the shock of Dad's anger and being pushed away. And the pain made the reality even harder to bear. Confused about why Dad suddenly became cold towards me, I couldn't stop crying. Mom hugged me while I cried, but Dad left the house without looking back, even though I was crying. Seeing Dad leave like that, I felt abandoned and cried even harder. This incident made me afraid to trust anyone but Mom for a while, and I think it made me even more introverted. Dad never returned after that, and we continued living in the house, but a few days later, he came back. I briefly hoped we could be a family again, but that hope was quickly shattered. I'm selling this house because I'm moving in with my girlfriend. Get out. Dad showed Mom some documents. I remember this house being built when I was in 1st grade. Mom was delighted to have our own home. I was sure they had built it together. So Mom protested Dad selling the house on his own, but since it was in his name, she had to give up. Thus, Mom and I were forced to move to her parents' house. As a child, I was not privy to the dealings between Mom and Dad that followed. However, I often wondered why mom worked so hard, even though she probably should be receiving compensation and child support. I assumed part of her effort was for my sake, but I thought we would have more financial leeway if dad had been paying child support. Curious, I asked my grandparents about it during high school. I thought mom wouldn't want to tell me, and it must have been a painful topic for her too, so I couldn't ask her. According to my grandparents, it seemed dad had fled without paying any alimony or child support. Mom had contacted him numerous times about the missing payments, but after he became unreachable, she decided to prioritize our future and let it go. As I suspected, their divorce was due to dad's infidelity, confirming that he had betrayed our family. Hearing this from my grandparents, I understood why mom worked so hard and felt a surge of anger towards dad. Mom, it seemed, had given up pursuing dad further and hadn't even tried to find his address to urge him to pay for alimony or child support. Though I was angry with dad, who didn't seem to have much remorse, my desire to ease mom's burdens quickly overshadowed it. I wanted to make sure mom, who always prioritizes me over herself and is busy from morning till night, could have some time to relax. I've always thought that mom should take more care of herself. Using my anger towards dad as motivation, I doubled down on my studies, aiming to land a good job to assist mom. The thought of dad living carefree was frustrating, but I tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on our current life, just like mom. As a university student beginning to think about job hunting, I was organizing our storage to create a better resume. I hoped to recall past experiences for my self-promotion. While sorting through storage, I found letters from friends before I transferred schools in elementary, immersing myself in memories. Then, I came across an unfamiliar box. Curious, I opened it and found it contained documents from an investigation into dad's infidelity. I was shocked to find these hidden away. Though I had tried to stop thinking about dad, I still wanted to know what had happened between my parents. Compelled, I began to read the documents. As I read the story in more detail than what I heard from my grandparents, my desire for revenge against dad grew. My grandparents probably had chosen their words carefully or didn't know the full extent. Reading further, I realized dad had done worse things than I had imagined. He had been unfaithful for longer than I thought, and it seemed he hadn't even tried to hide his late nights from mom. His affair was with a woman 6 years his junior, who had had a difficult life herself. After a car accident left her mom dead, she had been working since she was a student because her dad had after effects. Despite having a more challenging life than mine, how could she not feel remorse for destroying a family? In the evidence photos of the affair, the woman walking arm in arm with dad was visibly pregnant. I couldn't help feeling disgusted seeing the two of them looking so content together. To anyone unaware, they would seem like a happy couple. Yet in reality, they were two people who didn't care about the misery they brought upon mom and me. I had tried not to dwell on my anger towards dad, but seeing this, it was impossible. I felt an overwhelming urge to make them suffer, but I managed to hold back. I thought about how mom would be saddened if anything happened to me and about the potential future of their child, who must be around middle school age by now, 12 years after the divorce. I couldn't forgive dad and his mistress, but acting on my emotions would only harm their child, causing them the same pain I endured. I didn't want to stoop to dad's level, and that thought stopped me. However, the anger was too strong to ignore. A few days later, on a weekend, I decided to visit the house mentioned in the investigation report. I doubted they would still be there after all this time, but I needed to check. Upon arrival, I found the house no longer existed, which left me with mixed feelings of disappointment and relief. I had wanted to confront dad about his affair and ask about mom, but the thought of actually meeting him was nerve-wracking. As I was walking away, convinced I would never meet him and that I should forget him, I noticed a nameplate with dad's name. I stopped, startled. Trying to convince myself it was probably someone else, curiosity led me to observe the house more closely. It was a spacious family home with a play area for children. Being a weekend, I could faintly hear children's voices. If dad had remarried his mistress after the divorce, it wouldn't be strange if they had a family. The thought was suffocating, and as I watched the front door open and children come out, I moved to a spot farther away to continue observing. Then, the parents followed, and despite looking older than in the photos, I recognized them as Dad and his mistress. Dad had built a happy family with his mistress without paying us any compensation or child support. While Mom struggled, Dad lived comfortably. Filled with anger, I clenched my fists. After watching them leave happily as a family, I headed straight to a detective agency and requested an investigation into Dad's family. I used all my savings and part-time job earnings for this. When I later received the investigation results, it confirmed that Dad had been living well after the divorce, with 3 children. While Mom and I struggled, Dad lived comfortably without facing any consequences for his affair, a fact that left me bitter. I realized I harbored not just anger but also resentment towards Dad and his mistress, who lived carefree after abandoning Mom and me. I wanted them to experience the same pain and hardship that Mom and I went through. However, recognizing that even though they were the worst, their children were innocent, I wanted to speak with them at least once, more for my peace of mind than for revenge. So, calming myself for a composed conversation, I decided to visit after school. Dad would be at work and the kids at school, leaving his housewife mistress, Abigail, at home. What was she thinking? Having an affair with a married man and now living happily with him? With questions and things I wanted to say, I went to their house on a day school ended in the morning and rang the doorbell. As expected, Abigail answered. "Yes, how can I help you?" Her normal response irritated me, and I blurted out, "How can you live normally after stealing Dad from Mom and me and breaking up our family?" It seemed I wasn't as calm as I thought, speaking sharply without realizing. "What? What are you talking about?" She seemed quite dubious, possibly on guard because of the sudden question. Perhaps for her, an affair was something that could be easily forgotten. This thought made my chest tighten. Amazed at how she could pretend not to know, I explained everything about my relationship with Dad and what happened 12 years ago. I broke into tears recalling the past, but once I finished, I looked at her for a reaction. The truth I learned then solidified my resolve for revenge. Some time later, I went for a job interview. With good grades and active involvement in various activities, I had many strong points. I usually passed the document screening without issues, and this time, as I faced the interviewers, it seemed like I had already left a favorable impression again. 3 interviewers questioned me while reviewing my documents. Thanks to my preparation, I answered smoothly, and the interviewer's cheerful expression and impressed attitude made me feel quite confident. At the end, when they said I could ask any questions I had, I decided to ask something I had been wanting to know. Does your company condone affairs? What actions would be taken if an affair occurs? My question surprised the interviewers, leaving them momentarily speechless. After a pause, they said they hadn't encountered such a situation but would probably impose some penalty. And when asked why I was inquiring about this, I explained the whole situation. My father, who abandoned my mother through infidelity, works here and is currently having an affair within the company. One interviewer, visibly upset, slammed the table and stood up angrily. Are you joking? How dare you come here and lie in such a manner? This is outrageous. I immediately retorted. Please don't shout just because I hit a nerve, Dad. I had actually known that Dad worked in this company and that he was involved in interviews as personnel. Therefore, I purposely attended this interview to expose Dad's actions. There were many interviewees, and it wasn't certain Dad would be the interviewer, but I thought damaging his reputation would be enough. His aggressive response to my presence added credibility to my story, and I felt a sense of satisfaction. Initially, Dad didn't seem to recognize me, but he became unsettled after reading my documents. He didn't remember my face, but my name and educational background must have made him realize I was the daughter of his ex-wife. He seemed relieved when I showed no reaction to seeing him, thinking I hadn't recognized him. I calmly retorted to Dad's anger. It's a fact that you cheated on Mom and are now in an affair with a younger woman in this company, right? I'm just stating the truth. The investigation I had commissioned revealed not only about Dad's post-divorce family but also his infidelity. Apparently, Dad was quite the philanderer, having 3 kids and still fooling around. He was having an affair with a younger female colleague, and there were photos of them looking happy together, leaving no room for denial. Is this some kind of harassment? Do you think you can get away with this? Dad accused me of lying and tried to blame me. He had been successful in hiding his actions so far and was desperate not to be punished. Smirking, I continued. It's the truth, isn't it? I wanted to know what the company thinks about having such a person in a responsible position. Dad wanted to make me look bad, but that wasn't going to happen. The other two interviewers, having witnessed our exchange, looked displeased. I showed them the final piece of evidence. By the way, this is the report on Dad's infidelity. I trust you will review it and take appropriate action. Dad tried to dismiss what I said in a panic, but I handed the investigation report to the other interviewers, asking them to address the affair. Dad tried to grab me, but I dodged and delivered my final blow. Abigail knows about this and is coming to the office today. I had told Abigail about Dad's affair, and in her anger, she had planned to confront him publicly. So before leaving the interview room, I declared to Dad that he had no escape. You told her? When did you even meet her? Dad, shocked and not expecting I knew Abigail, froze. Ignoring him, I left the room. Dad's yelling could still be heard after I closed the door, drawing stares from other interviewees. Normally, the atmosphere would feel uncomfortable, but knowing that I had derailed Dad's smooth life brought me a sense of relief. Originally, I came to this company solely for revenge against Dad, so failing the interview was not a concern. Having finished my task, I was walking down the hallway when I heard footsteps running up from behind. Turning around, I saw Dad, his face red with anger, charging at me to throw a punch. Surprised, I managed to dodge and avoided injury, but I stumbled and fell. Looking down at me, Dad shouted angrily. What have you done? If it weren't for you. As Dad tried to hit me again, I braced myself, unable to evade, and covered my head with my arms, preparing for the impact. However, before he could strike, Dad froze. What are you doing to Chloe? And what's this about an affair? You told me you were single, but you've been deceiving me. Abigail had arrived, startling Dad. She swung her bag at Dad, who was ready to strike me, hitting and shielding me from him. Abigail, it's not what you think. Dad panicked at Abigail's arrival, but as Abigail, angered and feeling deceived, started to confront him, they began to argue. Abigail, while shouting in anger, hit Dad with her bag, causing a major commotion. It turned out that when I confronted Abigail about the affair, she was unaware that Dad was married. I'm sorry, even if I didn't know. You must have suffered a lot. I will definitely make it up to you. I'm truly sorry. She apologized tearfully. Further conversation revealed that she met Dad through work, and he had been helping her as a struggling motherless child. Dad had hidden his marital status, and they eventually started dating. Abigail had been working right after graduating high school in order to live with her father, who suffered from the after effects of an accident, which also took away her mother. It was natural to develop feelings for Dad, who had helped her. I had thought the mistress would be a terrible person, but Abigail was another victim of Dad. Apparently, Mom had never asked Abigail for compensation or even contacted her, and until now, Abigail was unaware of Dad's misdeeds. I wondered why Mom hadn't pursued compensation from Abigail, but then remembered she was pregnant at the time. Perhaps Mom didn't want to burden a pregnant woman, even if she was the mistress. Thinking this as I watched Abigail tearfully apologize, I realized she wasn't the villain I had thought her to be. She didn't look like she was trying to deceive me. So, I told her about Dad's current affair with a coworker. The investigation report included evidence of Dad's ongoing infidelity. I thought that Abigail, being a victim herself, deserved to know about Dad's current actions. When I showed her the documents, she became furiously angry at Dad. He lied about being single, married me, and now this? What kind of person is he? I will never forgive him. Her anger towards Dad, the betrayer, ran deep, and together we decided to take revenge on him. Originally, I had applied to Dad's company and was already scheduled for a second-round interview. So, on the day of the interview, Abigail and I had planned to go to the company and publicly denounce Dad. The two caused quite a scene in the company hallway, with other male employees restraining Dad and security arriving. I took Abigail's hand and led her out of the company after the commotion. Many people had gathered around due to the noise. Among them, I spotted the woman from the investigation photos, hiding in the shadows with a petrified look on her face. My revenge was complete by exposing Dad's misdeeds, which had been hidden until now. Subsequently, Dad, who was on the verge of becoming a department head, got demoted to a regular employee due to the affair. Since most of the situation became known during the chaos in the hallway, he seems to be working with a sense of humility. He used to have a reputation as a family-oriented and capable supervisor, but when Dad's bad deeds became known within the company, he was branded the worst man and was treated coldly. The woman Dad had an affair with apparently quietly resigned from the company. Additionally, Abigail demanded compensation and child support from Dad and informed him of her intention to divorce. With the company's cooperation, Dad couldn't escape paying. During the divorce mediation, Abigail discovered that Dad had not paid any compensation or child support to my mom, and also learned of his gambling habits in addition to spending money for his lover. Though he claimed it was occasional, he had been deceitfully spending family savings on gambling. Abigail, further enraged by these revelations, successfully demanded a higher amount of compensation and child support from Dad. Dad tried to deceive until the very end and was very reluctant about the divorce and compensation, so the mediation didn't end quickly. But Abigail persistently questioned Dad, and the commotion became known even to those outside the company who were unaware of the chaos at the office. Consequently, acquaintances of Dad who were unaware of the situation gradually distanced themselves from him. Dad became completely isolated as a result. After the divorce, Abigail offered me a part of the compensation as an apology. This might not be enough to make amends, but I hope you'll accept it as an apology for the trouble I've caused. However, since I had kept my revenge against Dad a secret from Mom, I declined the money. Abigail, you're also a victim of Dad, and the children need the money more. Please keep it for them. Mom seemed to have put her past with Dad behind her, so I had no intention of bringing it up again. I thought that Mom, who must have suffered a lot, wouldn't want to remember it anymore, even after Dad received his comeuppance. I didn't harbor any resentment towards Abigail or her children, who were also victims of Dad. Instead, I frequently visited them, concerned about their well-being as a single-parent family. The children and I grew close. And I hope they grow up righteously, unlike Dad. Getting to know Abigail better, I realized she was naturally calm and not the type to raise her voice. The stark contrast to the woman who had fiercely confronted Dad in the company made me reconsider Mom's strength during the divorce. Later, I successfully got a job at my preferred company and shared the news with Mom, who was overjoyed at my growth. Seeing her happiness made me feel content. And without the shadow of Dad, I truly relished the moment. Determined to reduce Mom's burden, I geared up for my new job. I may never forgive Dad for his actions, but he's already received his just desserts. Now, I want to live happily, not worrying about Dad anymore.